Welcome to Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute. I am joined again by Shepard, the voluntarist. He is the author of Anarchy Exposed. A former police officer reports on his investigative journey. He also wrote this book with Larkin Rose. Shepard, the voluntarist, where is the best place to find your collection of work?
Well, because everyone is kind of in our philosophy area, we definitely want to support Jeff Bezos. So I would suggest going to Amazon, and that way the CIA can also know that you're getting the book. Which information is power, and it's good to share information. So yeah, you could get the book there, and you can also get it on the audio version. Patrick Smith of Disenthrall did an audio version of it, and so that's available on Audible.
When and where were you a police officer?
I was a police officer. I started out for the first couple years in Southern California, and I worked in a jail. I went through about a 6-month academy, and then I worked in a large jail, and I was in one of the 7 jails in this county jail system. I think mine was 1,600 people in it. So I worked there for about 2 years. Then I went out on the street for about 6 months and got canned. I got fired. I didn't cut it as a cop in the big city. And so then I put out my application a bunch of places, ended up back in my hometown, just a little town in the Rocky Mountain region. And I was a cop there for almost 8 years. So I ended up having just under 10 years as a cop. And in the last department, I worked patrol and investigations. I did a couple years as a crimes against children detective, was on the SWAT team and ended up the sniper team leader and got to do bicycle patrol and mounted patrol and all the cool stuff that small agencies would let a guy do.
Now, I want to go through the chapters here. One is titled The Start of My Investigative Journey. First of all, why did you want to investigate this thing called anarchy?
Well, you know that the actual origin of this book was Larkin Rose's book, What Anarchy Isn't, and just a short booklet. And I read that, and in chatting with him, I said, Larkin, you're so perfect about everything, except you're harsh. You're not sweet and sugary around the edges. And like, I can't give this book to my mainstream aunt. She's going to be offended by the things, when you say something like, most people are stupid because they don't realize blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. But kind of from a marketing perspective, we need it to be nicer and sweeter. And can I kind of rewrite your book using everything you did as the main theme? And then I'll just kind of add and take away stuff. And then if you like it, we'll keep your name on it. And if you don't, then it'll just be my deal and you won't be attached to it. So that was kind of the origin of the book. So I took his manuscript from What Anarchy Isn't, and then I just kind of rearranged it in the order, and I decided to do it from kind of telling the story of my journey to voluntarism. So that was kind of the foundation of it, and so the chapters just kind of happened to line up in that way. I don't know if that answers your question. If not, I could be a politician, I guess.
Chapter 2 was titled Can People Accurately Predict Complex Systems? What does that mean?
I love the idea of what was, I think, the Black Swan, that book by I'm not even going to try to think of his name, but a brilliant book, and it mentioned this idea of complex systems, and then I kind of looked into it more, and I realized that things social are so complex that it's impossible, even if it was morally acceptable, for there to be a central planner, a master, a ruler. Even if we decided that that was morally acceptable, they're going to suck at it, because kind of the idea of a complex system, as I understand it, is throwing a football, and then the football lands, and you can maybe kind of sort of predict which way it will bounce the first time, but then as it bounces 3 or 4 more times, you cannot predict accurately where it will land. Whereas with a simple system like a thrown tennis ball or basketball, you can have a pretty good idea of the direction that it'll end up stopping, assuming we're on a flat parking lot. And so looking at this complex problem, that's what society is. And you think you're going to solve one problem by being a tough master and making everybody stay inside and not go outside for, I think it was only 2 weeks, as I recall. And so you try that, and then you realize, oh, a bunch of people are committing suicide, and children are not well adjusted, and the women are getting beaten by their husbands, and there's a lot of child abuse going on, and bankruptcies, and you realize this football, even if, and I don't believe this, but even if it was a well-intentioned lockdown, and back the whole last couple and a half years, even if it was well-intentioned, you can't plan out a complex system like that. It's just not going to work. So that chapter kind of explains that in a little bit of detail, just kind of introduces that concept.
And a lot of people might say, well, government, there's also planning in the private sector with firms, private equity firms, and investors and entrepreneurs. Customers often plan. And in politics, there's can be decentralization. There could be one president, but also 50 states, and within those, 20 counties in each state or whatever. Why is central planning something you pin on government, but not something you pin on the voluntary sector?
Excellent question. And I think it comes down to the idea of consent. And I'm a small business owner, and I centrally plan the activities in our business. I know the inventory, I know the equipment, I know the workforce, the labor. I kind of have to plan all of that and put it together. However, it's on a small scale and it's all voluntary. And so I think those two things, I've looked at things that are, even though they're mostly voluntary, if they get too big, it, to me, my observation has been that it breaks. If Walmart or Kmart or Amazon, if they get too big, then they start getting too far removed from their basic core, and it ends up the customer service is bad and the quality is bad, and then that of course is awesome because it opens up the door for smaller entrepreneurs to get their foot in the door and say, hey, I actually have good customer service. I'm not going to track you, and I don't also work for the CIA. Hey, you want to buy your thing from me online instead? So I think that's a good thing that that opportunity exists. But yeah, it's the size and the lack of consent that is inherent in any government, even the preferred Republican, what is it, what's it called? The U.S. government has a system of Republican democracy, or I forget what it's called, but whatever it is, constitutionalism, whatever that stuff is they do, it's still somebody forcing their mastership over poor innocent little folks who just want to sit around and read Lysander or Spooner and not be mastered by anybody. So the consent is a huge issue.
Yeah, Sheldon Richman summarized it. He goes, I don't even need to take an elevator pitch. I'll just use the word competition. That's really what differentiates the two. That, even your local government does not have anyone to compete with. You could always move, but in the same way, if I was aggressing against my neighbor, he wouldn't accept move as a legitimate response. And certainly, it's amazing reading the book Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. He lists all these companies that at the time were thought to be oligopolies and monopolies that will never end. Sears, A&P Grocers. His updated versions discuss things like MySpace and Blockbuster and AOL Messenger. It's like, oh, that was like the only thing that was around for quite a while. So I love that you addressed that so early in the book. Chapter 3 is titled, But We Need Some Government, Don't We? How do you respond to that claim?
For me, it comes, the foundation is clarifying with the person with whom I'm speaking. Are we talking about morality, or are we talking about practicality, pragmatism? And if we're talking, and which is a higher value, and values are subjective. And if my highest value is morality, and the person with whom I'm speaking, if their highest value is efficiency or rules, order, safety, something like that, then it's very difficult. I mean, I have to take a completely different tact when I explain voluntarism. So it's a very different thing. It depends on where the person is coming from. So if a person will agree to talk about morality, because that's really all I'm interested in discussing, and I'll give the example of the best way to rape a woman. If somebody wants to have that conversation with me, I would decline having that conversation because I think it's wrong to rape women. And to actually get into the best way to kidnap them, get them into the van, tie them up. Like, I don't want to get into immoral discussions of disgusting, nasty stuff like raping women or government or something like that. So I decline to discuss that kind of stuff. And instead, I want to discuss how we can be more moral, how I can improve, and how I can encourage my neighbors to improve and be helpful to them and help them on their journey. That's kind of the beginning of most of those conversations.
So when someone asks, do we need some government? Say, yes, I'm against things like rape and we need a government to stop these things like rape. We at least need some sort of structure that exists that allows society to operate. How do you respond to that?
I agree with part of that. I love the idea of people organizing themselves, society organizing itself to solve these problems of I'm thirsty. I want something fizzy that has aspartame in it. So I can go and find a drink. Like, this is awesome that society has solved the problem of a drink that I like to drink. And I think that society can, without government, just as they came up with Diet Coke, they can come up with solutions for protecting people from getting raped. And it's not going to be perfect. I'm sure it would be better than the current system, but it's not going to be perfect. Women will still be raped. People will be murdered. Bad things will happen, even with my favorite system. But this utopian idea that small government will work is just, to me, it's ludicrous because it's based on this immoral premise. So yeah, I would say even if we did have to have government in order to stop rape, it's not okay to condone something bad, even if it fights something that I would agree is very bad.
And what is the immoral premise of government?
The fact that some people tell other people what to do without their permission, and that government takes money away from people against their will without their free consent. And so, if a government could exist without non consensual money taking by donations, then I would be okay with it. But we wouldn't call it government. We would call it a private organization. Kind of part of the definition of government has to be that it's not a opt in, opt out kind of thing. It's geographically determined that some people say, I'm going to rule everybody in this area. And that ain't right, man. That ain't right.
Yeah, and sometimes I hate to use the example of rape, just something so terrible. You kind of want to ignore it. However, when people argue about foreign policy, they're often discussing the murder of dozens, hundreds, thousands of human beings, which is way worse than that, which just goes to show you how they can clearly desensitize people just by passively talking about, well, we're going to have to bomb these people and there were sanctions and Russia and Ukraine, as if the not saying some people, because of the edicts of the ruling class, murdered other innocent people because their ruling classes were in disagreement. And here's the images of their limbs getting blown off. We just, desensitize it. Well, Britain and Germany went to war, and France was involved, and Russia was involved. Those aren't people's names. Those are just like these organizations that make it so far so vague in our minds and doesn't allow us to really appreciate the evil of this organization. That talking about war and the costs and benefits are literally like talking about rape. It's that bad, but we forget to appreciate it.
Yes, I actually have a former Marine pal who's also a voluntarist, and he mentioned he heard someone talking about a troop transport vehicle, and he said troop. He said, "What's a troop?" And he said, I fought beside Billy and Bobby and Sam, but I never fought beside a troop. What's this troop you're talking about?" And his point was, it's sure easier to say that 10 troops died, 10 of our boys, our troops died. That desensitizes, as you were saying, and it takes away that human aspect of what's really going on. The troops brought peace. Well, So do murderers. There's kind of peace after they finish killing somebody. It's really peaceful around there for a few minutes. They brought peace, but that ain't cool. And neither is the military part of it.
Exactly. And what an opportunity today to say, just do whatever Putin says and then you'll have peace. Oh, so blindly obeying someone you don't like isn't that convenient. Okay. Well, now you know exactly how I feel.
Yes.
Chapter 4 is titled Anarchy in Action Today. What are examples of anarchy in action today?
Oh boy, I need to just glance at the book quickly. I have not read it recently enough. Let me take a quick look here.
You know
Okay.
what? I can
Got it.
cut this out if you don't want.
Nope.
Oh,
Keep this in because I should
okay.
review my own book every so often. So some of the examples would be our conversation today and the company that you're using the technology company to record this, or at least attempt to record this conversation. The drink that I'm drinking, the fact that I married someone that I chose, that my neighbor stopped by this morning and just said, "Hey, thought you might want some eggs," and dropped off 18 eggs of their chickens that just laid. Those are all examples of anarchy, just absolute anarchy in the streets. And anarchy is simply without rulers, not without rules, because I kind of have a rule on my ranch that you wear a shirt unless it's really, really hot out, but you don't just come over without a shirt or shoes. And like, that's kind of impolite until we get comfy and are drinking wine. So I have a rule, but it's my property and I get to do that. However, I'm not a ruler. And I kind of see the distinction there as if it's a voluntary thing, if I ask to work for you and we make that agreement, and part of the contract is that you will tell me what to do, and I agree to that voluntarily, then I don't consider you a ruler. I consider you a supervisor or a boss or something, but I don't find that to be immoral. So I think that almost everything in the world, all of our interactions, huge percentage of them are in fact anarchic in nature. It's there isn't a government involved in almost everything that we do. When they do step in, they mess stuff up. Occasionally, they'll do a little bit of good or get something right. I really appreciate driving on paved roads. So they stole the land from people, they stole money from people, and then they inefficiently built the roads. And I might not like that I'm driving on stolen property, but it's pretty smooth and it's not that bumpy. And I'm able to go 70, 80 miles an hour to get from place to place. And that's really nifty. However, niftiness doesn't make immoral things okay. And I much prefer all these voluntary anarchic relationships to that coercive government option.
And there's tons of traffic jams on the roads. If the private sector ever created those, we'd be hearing, we need to nationalize the roads. 30,000 people die every year on the roads. We'd certainly be hearing, well, we need to nationalize the roads. This way they're safe. This way we have politicians who look out for us and keep the roads safe. It was such an amazing thing the other day. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. I forget. My friend was supposed to drive me somewhere and then canceled at the last minute. And I sort of went into panic mode. It was more or less an emergency. So just fascinating how this just hit me out of nowhere. It was, okay, well, I need to download that car ride app. Uber wasn't working at the time for some reason. I go, what's another one? Lyft. So I went to a competitor. So I use my Samsung phone that cooperates with Verizon to give me service. I'm on my Cox Cable Wi-Fi, and I download from the Google App Store an app titled Lyft, which I use my Google email to log into, which then I attach my PayPal to, which is connected to my Bank of America Chase account, which then gets a driver who has his Lyft app, who drives a Ford car to come to my house built by, I mean, there are so many people cooperating to do me this favor in a time of need, and right there when I needed them. They were all there just sitting waiting for me. And this is just the brilliance of this system. And then you can go through every other, continuous aspect. The tires were put on by Discount Tire. Those people have clothes who work at Discount Tire that were made by someone else. It's this web of complexion. So it's not like a line, like there's 1, 2, 3. It's constantly people voluntarily working together that you never could have guessed. So to say that, well, we need someone to coercively plan and get things in order, you never know how convenient that things will be. Were you holding up an item that reminded you of
Yeah,
something?
you are basically giving the modern version of iPencil.
Yeah, yeah,
I
really.
mean, that's you were giving just such a perfect example of that of how that's working now. Just all these voluntary, each person, these greedy people who want to make $7, $8, $9, $10 an hour. They won't just work for free. So there's all this greed in the world, and yet it's a good thing, because if it wasn't for those people creating all these different pieces, you wouldn't have had a ride when you needed it. Like, it's pretty awesome how this world is, except for the government.
Speaking of greedy people, don't you know, Shepard? Hold on, I have to put my statist, disappointment, manipulative voice on. Oh, Shepard. Don't you know that without cops, there would be warlords?
Yeah, immediately, probably.
How do
Yeah.
you respond as an anarchist to the existence of a warlord objection?
Yes, and I actually think, and some anarchists think that they can predict the this complex system of what would happen, and they're a little bit too optimistic, in my opinion. I think there would be a really nasty time. There aren't a lot of bad people out there. However, there are some. There are some hardened people who have spent time in government prisons learning how to stab and steal, and their third, fourth generation welfare. That's just what's in their brain. And when you take multi-generational, poorly trained, poorly educated people, and the only thing that's keeping them in control is a particular entity, government, and then you remove that, I think there would be a time of great discomfort, especially in big cities. I think that there would immediately be bad guys trying to hurt good guys, and there would be a learning curve. People would say, maybe we don't need sensible gun control. I really wish I had a gun because people are trying to break into my house right now. I think that there could be a time of great unrest for a while, especially in big cities. But then I really think that people are going to solve the problem. I think people are going to say, I don't like getting robbed. I don't like my family getting killed. So I'm going to come up with a solution for this. I'm either going to do it myself, or I'm going to hire someone else to solve the problem. So if we hit Murray Rothbard's big red button to immediately stop government, if we hit that, and it instantly, military, law enforcement, all government protectors, quote unquote, disappeared, I think that we would have a tough time for a little bit. But then there would be so many free market folks popping up and saying, hey, how about we patrol your streets? And the solution would come about. But yeah, I think anytime you get thousands of years of government screwing up people's brains, there's not an instant utopian fix to it. There would be a time of discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be so much demand for property protection that it would be a huge incentive for entrepreneurs, and you wouldn't have the state stopping people from defending themselves, just like they, put Kyle Rittenhouse through the ringer for clearly defending himself against a psycho pedophile chasing him, and then a guy pointing a gun to his face, closer than a foot away. The McCloskeys, who went outside of their house with guns. I don't think they were pointing them directly at them, but look, the point is that while all these riots go on, David Dorn, the former cop, was killed on video, and there wasn't a big investigation into that. Martin Bird was the officer who killed Ashley Babbitt, the unarmed, mostly peaceful protester, and we didn't get anything from that. So again, it's not that Should we have property protectors and people protectors or not? The only question is, should we have a coercively funded monopoly or voluntarily funded competition? And once you phrase it like that, you go, you know what? There could be bad things. You know when else there's bad things? When Russia's killing civilians in Ukraine, when the Ukrainians are killing civilians in the Donbass area, when the DEA is kidnapping our friends for peacefully using certain plants. So I hate to give them as much credit to say, yeah, things might be bad. Is it going to be any worse than the world wars governments have given us? I mean, is it going to be anything like that? I really don't think so.
I want it. I mean, I
Yeah.
agree that in the long term, um, the solutions will be found. But I buy a lot of ammunition because of my business, and the free market I have found is slow, and it eventually solves a problem. But ammunition should be a certain cost. Like that's kind of there's an equilibrium that it kind of gets to, and with inflation, all this stuff happens. But then when all of a sudden things happen, and there's a problem, completely government caused, I'm sure. But then there's a huge shortage of ammunition, and 223 rounds go up to $1 each instead of 3.35 each. And then it takes years and years for the free market to catch up and fix the price again. I think now they're 500 or 600 bucks for a case, or 50 or 60 cents per round. So it still hasn't gone back from when it exploded 2.5 years ago. And so I trust the free market 100%, just as I trust my wife 100%, and I trust you not to stab me 100%. But at the same time, I can say, my wife, the free market, and Keith, they're awesome. They're the best possible wife friend system, but they're not perfect. They're not immediately fast. Everything isn't always perfect. There're going to be some slow, tough times. And I think that's what would happen. And yes, it would not be worse than what the government is doing. Absolutely not.
When it comes to taxation, the subject of Chapter 6, all taxes are, say, our opponents here, or our good friends who see the world a little differently than I do, all they are paying for a service that everyone gets in exchange, sort of like pooling your money so everyone can indiscriminately get access to things like police and fire department. How do you respond?
I think that it is okay, morally, it's acceptable for people to pool their money and do things. But again, we come back to consent. Is this a voluntary thing? And I think that, maybe that would be a good mid step, would be if the IRS changed their forms and said, hey, look on our website here. We have 137,000 things that we spend the money on. And you pick your favorite things and how much money you want to put into them. And a Republican might say, well, we need to kill, brown people around the world. So let's get lots of money for wars and let's pay soldiers, and we like rules. So let's pay for cops. So a Republican might want to donate money to the war machine and the criminal injustice system machine. They might want to donate to that. And a Democrat might say, I just want to feed the poor teenage immigrant mothers on welfare. I just want to help the poor people who need help, and I'll donate money to that. And if there was a system like that, you could donate as much or as little as you wanted. I don't think the $70,000 speed of ketchup running study would be done. There are so many things that I don't think would get funded. And so I'm not opposed to chipping in for the common good, chipping in for stuff that we're all going to enjoy. I do that voluntarily. I think without a coercive government stealing from us, it would just be much better to do it voluntarily. And some things would not be funded. And we just got a property that is on a private, or not a private road, a county road. And we're about 1.8 miles down the county road, and there are only 3 homesteads on this road. So I am benefiting from a huge waste of taxpayer money. The county should not be maintaining this road. if everyone in my county or in my neighborhood or jurisdiction was asked, hey, does everybody want to chip in a bunch of money so that these 3 families can drive smooth roads right up to their driveways? People would say no, they need to move where everybody else lives. I'm not paying for them to go out there. If they want to do that, they need to get a 4-wheel drive. That's what would happen in a free market. And so I completely admit I benefit in many ways from the horrible system that's out there, but it's not acceptable because it's taxation. Whether I'm benefiting, whether I'm not, if taxation is theft, it's actually extortion is the type of theft. It's not robbery. People say it's robbery, different. But let me clarify that, by the way. Robbery is the taking of the property of another by means of force or fear, immediate force or fear. Theft, larceny, is taking of something from someone that is with the intent to permanently deprive that person thereof. And then if it's over a certain amount, it becomes felony. If it's below a certain amount, it's a misdemeanor. Extortion is taking money with future threats of force or nastiness or whatever. So taxation is in fact theft, and the form of theft that it is extortion. Now it's interesting, in the law books, it's always added any unlawful taking of the property of others without their permission. Well, wait a minute. Why do we need to have that word unlawful there? It's completely so that the government can say, well, nobody else can do this except we can. And it's my belief that taxation, theft, extortion, robbery, burglary, these things are always wrong. They're always immoral. They're always bad, even if I benefit.
Yeah, certainly you can tell that taxation's bad by simply asking that same person, can I issue taxes? Can the Koch brothers issue taxes? Can the Catholic Church issue taxes? I mean, after all the great buildings the beautiful Catholic Church has given us and the great rules that we've been, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal. These people should be stealing $4 trillion a year, not you guys. Uh, but
Exactly.
but but of course, all of a sudden, then they have, well, if they want it, they should do it voluntarily. Well, we're just having this same concept for this other group. It's amazing how they will call themselves representatives, but then not be interested in representing you at all. Be like, well, if you really represent me, let me opt out. I'll give you the exact same money, right? Because you represent me already. So nothing's going to change. No, we're not going to give you that option. I had it with a COVIDian the other day who was like, the reason we're requiring masks is for everyone's benefit. I had already seen this liar in the back with her coworkers without a mask, so I just knew it. And there's probably 35 of us in this room, and this woman was saying, if it's required, I'm going to opt out of everything. And she goes, well, it's for everyone. So I go, what if we had a vote and only if it's unanimous? Because I'm fine with her not wear. She's obviously, not comfortable wearing it for the day. If it's unanimous, if there isn't a single person, then can we not wear them? And she looks at me and goes, no. And I go, oh, so it's not about everyone else's interest. And she goes, what? And I go, well, you can't hear me with this goddamn thing on, can you? She goes, oh, well, we got to move on. So I've needed to get that off my chest. I'm sorry. Chapter 8 is titled, But Human Nature. So, in other words, the argument goes, humans are inherently greedy. They might want zero-sum interactions. I want to benefit at your expense. Therefore, we need a government in between our primitive side and the civilization that we'd like to build. What is your response to human nature is bad, therefore government is justified?
Yeah, and I don't believe that. I don't believe that it's people are basically bad. I think that there's a small percentage, maybe 2 or 3 or 4% of people are bad. Even sociopaths and psychopaths make up something like 4% of the population. But just being a sociopath doesn't make you bad. It just makes you not able to empathize and that kind of thing. So not every sociopath is a bad, like going out and doing bad stuff. So if you take the sociopaths who are, and then the people who just have that mean bone in their body, they still have empathy and they can feel what other people do, but they still choose to go out and be nasty. I think we're only looking at a few percent, few percent of the whole population, and it's pretty easy to control that number. I think that I would feel comfortable taking on the responsibility of protecting myself from those few people if they weren't given the title of government and if it wasn't legitimized. If somebody simply wants to come to my house and steal something, I'm happy to, see what their situation is. If their, kid is starving, I'll give them some food. And if they're not, or if they don't want to talk about it, then I will cast them off of my property in whatever use of force I choose to that day. And I am happy taking on that responsibility, just as I take on responsibility for the muddy area in front of our doorstep. It's my job to take care of that. It's not somebody else's job. So yeah, they're always going to be dangerous animals. Some of them people, some of them not. And yeah, we've got to watch out for them and watch where we go. And if a bunch of them are hanging around in one area, don't go there unless you want trouble. And then there might be some young bucks like I used to be, and who would say, "Hey, let's go out and do some good tonight. Let's go to that bad area. And when 3 or 4 people come to rob us, let's help them not breathe anymore." And if they're doing that, that's not immoral in my book. If you're defending yourself against being attacked, even if you're kind of baiting people, I think there would be people like that, the vigilante type, who would kind of go and be problem solvers. And as long as they're not initiating violence, I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, when it comes to the human nature concept, this again is just people criticizing the world and then pinning it on the free market. It's like, yeah, people are bad, which is why you don't want positions of government where those evil people can occupy, because it attracts the most evil people on the planet. It even gets good people to do totally terrible things.
Yeah.
And if they're, say, my neighbor and not my president for a change, well, then I want a number of competing property protection agencies trying to protect me, not one that's so entitled to my money. They say, we can't help until we get more funding, as though if they don't have enough funding as it is. Gosh, the
Yeah.
cops in Arizona. Oh, I gotta warn people against coming here. That it's great, but my gosh, the cops and the teachers are so entitled. Every penny is never, ever, ever enough. I'm still waiting on a thank you. Could I just get a thank you? When I go to Best Buy, I get a thank you. When I go to Apple, I get a thank you. When I go to YC's Mongolian Grill, I get a thank you. But not from these public servants, apparently. Not very thankful.
Nope. And the attitude back when I was a cop was, when somebody would make that complaint of, I pay your salary, would be grabbing a quarter and tossing it at the person and say, here's your money back. And it was just this cocky idea of what you paid is such a small amount that whatever, here you go. And I think that's a side issue, but that's why cop and teacher unions are so successful, is that it does only, and it means more than a quarter probably, but if it's $5 out of your annual theft, taxes, whatever you want to call it, if it's $5 of pain to you to have a teacher, to have the educational system going on, to the teacher, it's $70,000, $80,000 a year of income. So you're not going to take a full day of your life to go picket with signs and say, stop paying teachers. However, to them, it's very worth taking a day that they're getting paid for to go and stand there and wave signs saying, pay us more because we're understaffed and we need more administrators.
Yeah, and it's not just the money. Well, and part of it is the money. If you're forcing someone to allocate their scarce energy that they've earned towards something they don't like, that's really bad. But you're getting such worse quality than you otherwise would. Every single thing that the state funds, it's poisoned. That's why, there's so many ridiculous college degrees. People graduate school, high school, college, and they know almost so little. They fall for things like Trump and Bush and Bernie and Obama. Those are the educated people. You go to CFR.org, and the smartest of the smart, the Harvards, the Yales, the Princetons, believe every ridiculous historical lie. They believe every economic fallacy. Margaret McMillan was there the other day talking about how the need for a state is clear now more than ever, when talking about COVID. So not even caring that Fauci was spreading fake news on 60 Minutes. The U.S. Surgeon General agreed with him at the time. It was funded by the NIH and EcoHealth Alliance in Wuhan. I mean, they know nothing. So, yes, they poison everything they fund too. It's the quality of the things, not just the money. I'm not just being cheap here. Any thoughts on
I
that?
hear you.
The book is titled Anarchy Exposed. A former police officer reports on his investigative journey. Is there anything you want to add that I didn't ask about or you left out in your answers about your investigative into anarchy?
I would like to invite people who are interested in this kind of stuff to get the book. I have it priced so that I think I'm making 1 penny per book sold. I priced it as low as Amazon would let me go on it.
Greedy
And so,
profit seeker. I knew you were profiting. I
yeah,
knew it this whole.
yeah,
Stop
getting rich
recording.
off of
Oh,
this.
this is over.
Um, so I would encourage everybody to get the book, or if you can't afford, I think it's $3.49 or something. If you can't afford that, get in touch with me, and I will send you the free manuscript of it, the PDF version or whatever, and you can read that. And I love feedback. If you're going to give good feedback, please go to Amazon and leave it. If you have actual ideas of, well, you didn't clearly address stuff on pages 37 and 38, that should be clarified more. I would love to make it better. My goal for the book is, and I think your audience is probably mostly the choir. We're preaching to the choir. This book is for choir members to be able to hand a book to their coworker, to their
Yes.
cousin, that isn't offensive and harsh, and is just kind of a, hey, here's some ideas, look at it, see what you think. And I've got to say, I don't think this book is perfect, and I'm writing another one now that I'm just kind of doing from scratch. I think that the most dangerous superstition for a computer engineer who's kind of a very straightforward linear thinker who doesn't mind harshness, it's the perfect book. It is wonderful. Anarchy, Everyday Anarchy by Stefan Molyneux is wonderful. But I still don't think that there is a perfect book. I think this one gets pretty close, but I don't think there is a perfect beginner book that I can hand to my Republican or Democrat aunt or uncle and say, oh, check this out. What do you think of this? That is not going to make me look silly or crazy or wacko. So yeah, feedback is what I would love. If you read the book and you have little bits of feedback or huge feedback, love to hear it, and I'd like to make it better.
Yeah, so it looks like the chapter portion is 40 pages, and including both appendices and further investigation and acknowledgments, it's 50 pages in total. So that's why it's so good. I mean, I'd love for people to read Man, Economy, and State. I think that would make the world a little a little interesting, and even Anatomy of the State. But
Yeah.
that's not written in a language that I think is too familiar with people. A few more things I want to discuss. There are a number of quotes on the back. I want you to explain the significance of these quotes. Number one, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect.
There's something that I have noticed, and my one of my hobbies is logic and reason, really understanding that, and propaganda. I love learning more about propaganda and identifying it such. And I've kind of started to notice the little boy that cries wolf, and that is the corporate media. And and of course people do, we know from propaganda, from Edward Bernays' work, 100 years ago almost, people don't form their own opinions. It is their opinions are manufactured by the press, and they believe what the press says. So we can take that step and we can look at the press and say that the press is telling people what they ought to believe, and the press is always on the side of the man, and either the UN, the local governments, whatever. And once you hear so many bad things, just like the kid that cried wolf, you start to distrust them. And I have found this to be true, and evidently Mark Twain did also, that if everybody's believing something, then yeah, you might want to really look at it. There might, very frequently, there will be a different, smarter way to think, or a different answer.
There are downsides to everything. There are unintended consequences to everything. What is the significance of that quote?
This one, and by the way, I got these from the quotable contrarian. A friend of mine wrote that book, a voluntarist also. For this one, this kind of goes to that chapter on systems, complex systems. And there are so many, even those of us who really want to do good, and maybe the people who would argue that the government should make big, huge decisions in people's lives, those unintended consequences that are a result are frequently far worse. Yeah, I love the example of the COVID thing about wearing masks, and you're driving a bus along, and you see a bump in the road, and you swerve to avoid the bump, and you drive off the cliff. And I think that's kind of what the COVID thing was, and that was an unintended consequence of a knee-jerk, horrible reaction to something that didn't really necessitate that kind of action.
Yeah, the key word for me is everything. So, in other words, when politicians say there's a problem over here, yeah, there is a problem. There are always problems. Giving you more power doesn't necessarily eliminate those problems. So, just because you call it universal health care, well, right now, you're just talking about the government having more power in the industry. Right now, there's universal courts. Does that mean everyone has justice? Right now, there's universal education, K through 12. Does that mean everyone's educated? No. In fact, it kind of means the opposite. There's universal policing, but you say that they're all run by white supremacists and people who are just super trigger happy. So even the things that we currently have are not universal in any sense, but that is the trick. So understanding that there are downsides to everything, then you won't get tricked by absolute lies like
Yeah.
that. Next one, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities.
Yeah, this one is something that I don't know. This hits me hard because I'm really bugged by war, by genocide, by war, by that kind of stuff. And I look at these ridiculous things that this blind trust or faith in government that so many people have, and it's so frustrating and sad, and it makes me realize that this whole the time of the Karens over the last couple years, everyone is so terrified of this boogeyman, this nasty flu thing, that the government can do really nasty stuff, and the neighbors will all jump in and call. There's somebody walking down the street, they're not wearing a mask, and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And the people after the horrible, millions were killed, as I recall, the huge insurrection that the Constitutionalists did on January 6th. I look at something like that, and I look at how there are these people that are still in jail, and they're not the 4 or 5 or 6 people who, yeah, you probably shouldn't break the window of a building. Yeah, you shouldn't climb over a fence or whatever, even if you own it. Yeah, I can kind of see how if you're the man, you're going to put people in jail for doing that. But the people who didn't do any of that stuff, they're still in jail. I consider that to be atrocious. That's an atrocity. And people have been so scared by so many different things, by the powers that be, that the government is allowed to get away with these atrocities.
And it wasn't just any building. It was the building where a group of conspirators frequently meet to discuss stealing from the population, to discuss violently dominating others, to discuss murdering people in foreign countries with stolen money. So they act like it was just either a random building or a building of great significance, sort of like Notre Dame. So if Target's on fire, that's kind of sad. But if Notre Dame's on fire, it's really bad. I go, well, if Notre Dame was where, I don't know, NAMBLA and the Mexican drug cartel met to conspire, well, then I'd stop caring about Notre Dame, assuming they'd been meeting there for 250 years, like these people have. So you're wrong on both analogies. I think we can merge. I think we can merge the next two. A reliable way to make people believe in falsehood is frequent repetition, because familiarity is not easily distinguished from truth. Authoritarian institutions and marketers have always known this fact. Second, The further a society drifts from truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. Comment on those two.
This frequent repetition thing, that is just, I'm so frustrated that the voice of good, peaceful voluntarists, the voice is so small and is so quiet because of our small numbers. And every time I hear something repeated, like COVID is kind of over, but not everybody's heard yet. And the spots have already been recorded. And so the government feels like they need to play them on the radio so they're not wasting money. So there's still, even though it's a thing that, like it's been done for months, like but people are still kind of continuing it and playing along with it. And they're able to do that because they have this mass media that they can get things out, and they can simply repeat over and over and over, pay your fair share of taxes, mask up to save grandma. And if you say it enough times, then people will just believe it. And yeah, no matter how absurd it is, if you just say it over and over with confidence, and you get smart in the way you say it, you have a black guy and a white woman and an Asian gal and I don't know, a Mexican Zer, and you have all these different voices saying something, and they're, oh, well, God, it must be true. It's on all the news. And then this craziness can spread and everybody can believe it. And that's what's happened. And yeah, it's tough living in many ways, kind of a real world idiocracy type environment. And you can't even get people to listen. You can't even say, let's sit down and have a 10-minute conversation. Oh, I wouldn't want to spend 10 minutes talking philosophy. There's too much soda. I want some more, I want what plants crave.
And then they tell us we have to spend hours and hours watching C-SPAN so we could get informed, and then we could vote as well-informed citizens. Yeah, of course. It's never saving us time, only them.
Yep.
What was the biggest lesson you learned as a police officer?
I think it was not as a police officer, it was afterward, realizing how wasteful my existence was, how unnecessary my job was in many ways. I look back at my many years and at the times that I say, okay, I did kind of save somebody that day, and it did work that time. I only have, I remember one time I got to a family violence call, and as I run up to the door, I see the guy starting to cock back his fist, and I run in and grab the guy. So that night, I think, maybe I did something good. But I shouldn't have actually entered, because our policy was to wait until there were 2 officers on scene. And I could have just waited by the door. That would have been obeying policy and just watched him punching her. So even the one thing I remember doing that was good, that was necessary, that I feel like well, I'm glad I was there that time. That I was going against policy to do it. So I think that was my big realization, is that there's a lot of fake, keeping you safe at night. I'm the reason that you can complain about the government, because I'm keeping you safe enough to do it. And I'm fighting for your freedoms. And I've got this beautiful brooch on my costume, and I'm saving you. Just this whole tough guy, we're out there doing good thing. I just kind of came to realize that, cops are really, more than anything, they're historians. If something bad really happens, they get there and they document what happened a few minutes ago. They're not really getting there in time to save the person almost ever. I mean, in my many years, I remember that one time, and I've really thought about it, that it wasn't already over by the time I got there.
Well, also, whenever I hear the stories of the officers doing something good, I think it's important to applaud those times, but also recognize it's not like you needed to be an officer to do that. Really, anyone could have done it. I mean, I remember the only time that I saw a man hit a woman. I was in high school. I remember whose house it was. I remember everyone who was there. And it was on prom. It was on our junior year prom. And the second he didn't even hit her, he just pushed her aggressively. And all the guys responded at once as though it was like the Godfather pulling strings. He just pulled the strings and all the guys swarmed onto this guy. So even it's not like we needed any special permission. You don't need a monopoly on violence to stop an aggressor. That's a right anyone else has. So yeah, you can have people dedicated to property protection, person protection, without having this halo of legitimacy that they get extra rights from the people they claim to represent. Great, great book. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you wrote this.
Well, thank you.
Now, if you want me to take this out, I'm happy to. I just have one question for you that I don't know if this is off limits. Please tell me if it is. But you had mentioned it to me once. Do you want to tell the story about the FDA regulation that you had to live through? Wasn't that you? You had said that your family applied for a medicine and then
Oh, yes.
someone passed away.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Shepard, you and I spoke one time about your dealings with the Food and Drug Administration. To take this philosophy and bring it to a reality, to show the real cost of what these allegedly well-intended regulations can do. Can you explain what happened with the FDA regulation in your family?
Yes. So my daughter was diagnosed with lung cancer in December of 17, late December. And so she was given 3 to 6 months to live. And so my wife is a former nurse and was just searching for solutions. And she actually wrote a book on it, Lung Cancer 101, all the things she learned. But she was doing all of this research and we're looking for solutions for any possible thing. Like, this isn't the kind of cancer that you're going to get better and do okay on. It's a done deal. And there was an experimental, there was a new drug that we applied for my daughter Lauren to be a part of that test. And I think it was a week or so after my daughter died in May of 2018, a week or so later, we got word, or we were contacted by the organization saying, hey, we're finally approved for this test. Lauren can do it. And the reason that was held back wasn't that they didn't have the juice all mixed up, but they were ready to test stuff. We would have been happy to do it. We were, desperate, but it came too late. And I don't blame the government for killing my daughter. But if they could have said, if she could have gotten it 3 or 4 months ago, and if it had worked, I haven't followed up on it to see what the results of it are. But if it had worked, that could have saved her life. And so I wonder how many hundreds of thousands and millions of lives are lost from people who die because the government is keeping the free market from putting these things out there. I don't see how there would be a problem with somebody saying, hey, we've mixed battery acid and Drano and vinegar and a little bit of peanut butter, and we think this might do some good, but we're not really sure, and it might just really mess you up and taste horrible. And we would sign the document, say, hey, we're desperate, we'll give it a go. And I don't really understand why a third party would interject themselves into that contract between two people. So yeah, I'm a little frustrated by that.
The book is Anarchy, Exposed a Former Police Officer Reports on His Investigative Journey. Shepard the Voluntarist, thank you so much for your time, brother.
Thanks for having me on, Keith.